Hello, Law Study students. It's Dr. Ray, and I'm coming to you from the past. Ooh. You should have already gotten the contracts PowerPoint notes. They are in Google Classroom. There's also a paper copy. If you have not already gotten this, let's go ahead and pause this video now and give you a chance to get it. Welcome back. So yesterday we talked about the differences between common and civil law and criminal and civil law and stare decisis and the importance of precedent and all of those things. Today we're going to start our unit of contracts just in contracts. So why are we reading cases? Because of stare decisis and precedent, but contracts is the content that we're reading cases to determine the case law for. Many of you might think that a contract is something that you sign with a signature or that it has to be a piece of paper. But really, all that a contract is a promise that is recognized at law. All right? Now, we're going to pause the video for a second. I want you to discuss with your tables for a couple of minutes what kinds of contracts do you think are recognized at law, and what kinds of contracts do you think are not recognized at law? So let's pause the video now. Welcome back. So if you look at the second slide on your PowerPoint, promise. A promise is an assurance or undertaking, however expressed, that something will or will not be done in the future. I want us to break that down. A promise is an assurance or undertaking. So an assurance could be something that is communicated like a message. An undertaking can be something that is done like an action. However expressed. However expressed tells me that a contract doesn't necessarily have to be written. Some contracts might be verbal. I might have contractual liability because of something that I sent in a text message. All right? However expressed. Let's look at the next part. That something will or will not be done. A promise can be a promise to do something, and a promise can also be a promise not to do something in the future. So I cannot promise to do something that has happened in the past. So let's look at those elements of that definition of a promise. 1, an assurance or undertaking. 2, however expressed. 3, that something will or will not be done. 4, in the future. Now, just because something is a promise doesn't make it a contract. A promise is or a contract is a promise that's enforceable at law. So, for example, if I were to say, I'm going to love you forever, do you think that that is a promise that would be enforceable at law?
No.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Aileen. I would hope not. That would be a really hard promise to enforce at law. And it might not be a promise that's enforced at law because it's missing some of the other things. And we'll talk about what you need in order to have a promise in a little bit. But I want you to pause the video for a minute and discuss this slide at your group for a couple of minutes before we come back. Welcome back. It's me again. I want to move on to the next slide in your notes, which is the or-e distinction. All right? You know how you practiced your prefixes and suffixes in biology last year. And we talked a lot about when we're breaking down vocabulary words yesterday, like when we were breaking down the word dichotomy or when we were breaking down the word bifurcate. We talked about how we can use prefixes and suffixes to understand the meanings of words. Today we're going to talk about the suffixes or and e. All right? So the suffix or implies that the person is the doer in the situation, and the suffix e implies that the person is the receiver in the situation. For example, at your age, if you're gossiping about some of your friends that were making out, it might be very important who initiated. In that case, you would want to know who was the kissor and who was the kissee. Okay, the kissor would be the person who kissed the other person, and the kissee would be the person that received the kiss. Of course, in a perfect world in which consent is key, you would want to be both, wouldn't you? You would want to both give and receive the kiss. For example, let's take another example. If I were to slap you in the face, I would be the slapper, and you would be the slappee. Okay? There are similar rules for other words. For example, in civil law contracts, also known as obligations, you might have an obligor or obligee. So at this time, let's go ahead and pause the video and discuss at your table some fun or-y suffix words that you could use to imply who is doing an action and who is receiving an action.
Hello, did I leave my phone here?
Welcome back. Now we're talking about the next slide, which is beneficiary. Everyone say hi to Yusra.
Hi, Yusra.
All right, they're saying hello to you from the future.
Okay.
Beneficiary. We're going to break down the word beneficiary the same way we break down other vocabulary words, and that's by looking at the root. Bene, all right? Is that a word that you might know the root of? Well, when it comes to words like this, our Spanish speakers have a leg up on everybody else, because Latin, the root of many English words, is also the root of all Spanish words. Is there a word that sounds like bene that is also a Spanish word? I hope that you've thought of bueno, because bene and bueno come from the same Latin root, which means good. So a beneficiary is a person who receives the good or the benefit of a contract or a promise. So let's read this together. When a performance of a promise will benefit someone other than the promisee, that person is called the beneficiary. Now, you guys probably don't have to deal with beneficiaries so much at your age, but in insurance contracts or in life insurance in particular, I have to designate a beneficiary. I get a free $20,000 life insurance policy as an employee of CFB ISD, and I have to designate, if I die in a fiery crash or otherwise, who will receive the $20,000 upon my untimely demise. Your camera person right now, Aileen, is pointing to her. Unfortunately, that is not the case. She is not my beneficiary. She's not the person that I have designated to receive the $20,000 benefit in the event that I die. Now, other types of promises might have a third-party beneficiary as well. For example, I might say, I will give you $20 to mow my mother's lawn. All right? In that event, I am the promisor, you are the promisee, and who's the beneficiary? You're right, my mother. All right? I would like for you at your table to come up with different situations where a promise is made that benefits somebody other than the initial two parties, and identify the promisor, promisee, and beneficiary. Pause now, and we'll come back in a minute. All right, welcome back. We're on our fifth slide now, which is consideration. Sometimes words have different meaning in legal terms than they do in the real world. So, for example, if I say, I would appreciate it if you would have some consideration for me, what I am asking you to do is take my feelings into account with your behavior. For example, I really hope that you have some consideration for your substitute while I'm in Las Vegas. But when it comes to the law, consideration has a very specific meaning. Consideration can either be a benefit received by the promisor or a detriment incurred by the promisee. Who's the promisor? I hope you just said the person who made the promise. Okay, who's the promisee? I hope you just said the person who received the promise. And most of the time in most contracts, we're going to have mutual promisor promisees. That means that one person is promising the other person something, and that person is in return promising the original promisor something.
So like hiring an assassin.
So like hiring an assassin, as our camera person just pointed out. So consideration is a requirement for all contracts. There are three main requirements for all contracts. And remember, a contract is just a promise that is recognized by law. It might surprise many of you to know that one of those requirements is not that it be written down. The three requirements are offer, acceptance, and consideration. And you probably know what an offer is. An offer is somebody offers to do something, another person accepts that offer, and consideration is some sort of mutual exchange. Usually, consideration is a benefit received by the promisor. I will give you $5 if you mow my lawn. Let's take a look at that. I'm the promisor, you're the promisee. I am offering you $5, and in return, I get the benefit of having my lawn mowed. All right? Now, let's take a look at another situation. Let's say that you are a troubled teen. I don't know if I have any of those in this class this year. I haven't gotten to know you that well yet. But let's say that you're a troubled teen, and I say, look, I've looked at your behavior records at Creekview, and I'm really worried about you, so I'm going to make you this offer. If you can refrain from drinking or smoking cigarettes or doing drugs by the time you graduate Creekview, I'll give you $100. Is that a promise that might be recognized at law? Well, maybe. Let's take a look. Is there an offer? Was there a promisor? Who's the promisor? I hope you said I was, because I approached you and I said, if you will do this, then I will give you this amount of money. Who's the promisee? You were. Is there a third-party beneficiary? Well, no. Not in this instance. There is not a third-party beneficiary. But is there consideration? Let's think about this. What did I ask you to do? I asked you to refrain from smoking or drinking or doing drugs between now and when you graduate. Is that getting anything for me? Well, maybe in some small way. I mean, society benefits as a whole when each of its members practice good decision-making and judgment, but it's not giving me any sort of direct benefit. But is there still consideration? Well, yes, because there's that second kind of consideration, a detriment incurred by the promisee. Recall, who is the promisee in this situation? You are. Well, what detriment are you incurring? Well, you are promising not to smoke, drink, or do drugs. Is that really a detriment, though? Because if you were to do those things, that would be a harm to you. Well, this is one of those instances in which the real-world definition and the legal definition are somewhat different. In this instance, detriment just means that you have limited your rights. And it's a limitation on your rights even if it's something that you're not legally allowed to do. So if I offer to pay you $200 not to drink, smoke, or do drugs by the time you graduate, you have limited the options that you had open to you. If you agree to that limitation and abide by that limitation, that promise might be enforceable at law as a contract. So at this point, I'd like us to pause the video and I want you to discuss with your table some kinds of promises and have some where the consideration is a benefit to the promisor and some where the consideration is a detriment to the promisee. Welcome back. Now we're going to talk about the three different types of contracts, and this is our last slide today. All right, so we're on our final slide. Now there are many subtypes of contracts, but all contracts will either be express, implied in fact, or implied in law. An express contract is something that the terms are spoken or communicated in some way. That might be that they're written down. That might be that they're sent by a text message. It might mean that they're spoken out loud. Any of those kinds of contracts are expressed. So most contracts are express. There are also implied in fact contracts. These contracts are not expressed out loud, but we can tell by your conduct that you meant something to occur. For example, when I go to 7-Eleven and I pick up a Snickers bar on the aisle and I put down my money on the counter and I leave, I have not expressed to anyone that I agree for my money to be exchanged for the Snickers bar. But there's still a contract in that issue that can be inferred from my conduct. Implied in fact contracts are also common in situations where businesses have a standing order and the supplier or vendor just sends the usual and the business just sends the usual payment. We can infer that they meant for there to be a contract from their conduct. All right? In contract law, intent is key. If we can look at what the parties meant to do, we're going to try to honor that. The last kind of contract is not even really a contract. It's called an implied-in-law or quasi-contract. Quasi, you may know from the Hunchback of Notre Dame. His name was Quasimodo. Quasi meaning not really or kind of, and modo meaning body. Why was he named Quasimodo? Because he had a funky body, right? He was a hunchback. So what is a quasi-contract? A quasi-contract is something that's not really a contract, but we treat kind of like one anyway. In these situations, a benefit has been conferred or given to someone, and equity, which is just a legal word meaning fairness, demands compensation. The most common example of this is, let's say that I am hit by a car and I am bleeding on the side of the road. When I go to the hospital, am I going to have to pay my medical bills? Yeah, I'm going to have to pay my medical bills. Why? I'm going to have to pay my medical bills because there was a quasi-contract. Now let's look at it. Was it ever expressed? Did I ever say out loud, I agree to give you money in order for you to save my life? No, I sure didn't. Let's look at implied in fact. What was my conduct? I was bleeding on the side of the road, right? Is there anything that you can infer from my conduct that I meant or intended to pay money in order to have my life saved? No. All right? But I still have to pay that medical bill. Why? Because I got a benefit of that service. And the law assumes that most people in that situation would want that benefit, and fairness demands that I have to pay for that benefit. Now, that's going to be the case even if I really didn't want that benefit. Let's say I'm part of a religion that forbids me to receive medical care. If I'm unconscious on the side of the road and an ambulance saves my life, I'm still going to have to pay for it, even if I have sincerely held religious beliefs. Okay, so implied in law or quasi-contracts don't depend on actual intent. All right, so this was our last slide. Before you go today, I want you to, with your group, give an example of an express contract, an implied in fact contract, and an implied in law contract, and then take a few minutes and make sure that you have a solid answer for every learning target so far this week. You can go ahead and share those with your group if you'd like to and see how good your answers are. Thank you, and I'll see you Monday. Bye.